If you're looking for a luxury watch out of Japan, the default choice for the past few years has been Grand Seiko. However, all that time, their local competitor Citizen have been making and selling domestically a range of watches that they want you to believe go toe-to-toe with Grand Seiko. But are they really on the same level? Welcome to Addicted to Watches. Today, we have a rather special watch to look at. It is a watch that shares many characteristics with watches from Grand Seiko, but at the same time is anything but a homage, and has its own very clear design DNA. This is the Citizen AQ3001-54E. This is not my first experience when it comes to the Citizen. When I was living in Japan, I saw this range regularly at Citizen boutiques, as well as some of the bigger department stores like Bic Camera and Yodobashi. At that time, I was curious but not yet ready to dip my toe into the water. I did really like what I saw though, and could see some commonality between the two brands. Most of their designs were understated, straightforward, simple and elegant. These were also what drew me to Grand Seiko, so it makes sense that I would like the Citizen too. What this range lacked, however, and still does to a lesser extent, is brand recognition. For many, even now, the name Citizen on the watch dial just makes them think of inexpensive, basic, almost but not quite fashion watches. With that kind of prevailing idea about the brand, it would be next to impossible to convince the average person to part with 4 figures for a watch with that name on the dial. So, should you? Did I? And, if you already did, would you have been better off with a Grand Seiko instead? Before we get too far into this, I should clear up one thing first. To me at least, this range from Citizen isn't trying to compete with Grand Seiko as a whole. I would say they are mainly competing with Grand Seiko's quartz lineup. You can get the Citizen with automatic movements, but the vast majority of them, including this one here, feature high-end quartz movements instead. Many, but not all, are eco-drive, meaning solar, but others are also just regular battery-operated ones. Accordingly, they are also priced more closely to GS quartz models as opposed to their automatic or spring drive ones. The original price of this AQ3001 is surprisingly hard to track down. I can see a few for sale second-hand between 100,000 and 150,000 Japanese yen, which converts to about $650 to $980 at the moment. Part of the reason the price is hard to track down is because, as mentioned, this is a JDM model only sold in Japan, and isn't readily available anywhere else. That's where the sponsor of this video comes in, Buyee. Buyee helped me be able to buy this watch from Yahoo Flea Market, an online shopping platform in Japan, even though I'm in Australia. Buyee is a proxy buying service that lets you shop from Japanese retailers and platforms that you wouldn't normally have access to. You can bid on Yahoo auctions, shop on Mercari, Rakuten, and a range of other places that only ship domestically within Japan. The items you order are shipped to Buyee in Japan, who then ship the items to you. You can also combine items into single packages to save on shipping costs. With the exchange rates the way they are at the moment, there are definitely some bargains to be had. If you want to see how to find them, go back and check out an earlier video where I explain how I find rare and interesting watches to buy for reviewing on the channel. In the description below, you'll also find a link to sign up where you'll get 10% off your first order, so you can save even more. Thanks again to Buyee for sponsoring this video. I found this watch in particular for sale on Yahoo Flea Market and bought it for 88,000 yen, or 575 USD. For that price, it was the watch only without the box, and has seen a little bit of wear, but I really don't mind. For that price, the quality, finishing and design you get is a pretty compelling package that in this case is almost the perfect one and done piece. Moving in for a closer look, let's start with the dial, my favourite part of the watch. This one has a subtle vertical stripe texture to it that isn't always obvious until you start looking more closely. It creates a really pleasant sunburst effect that isn't too strong and doesn't become distracting. The colour of the dial itself is somewhere between black, charcoal grey and a very dark purple. I think this is because the dial has to let the light through to the solar cell underneath, since this is a solar powered watch. There's a lot more going on with this dial though. All indices are applied rectangular battens and are very highly finished. 12, 6 and 9 have received doubles, while all others are just single battens. High polished bevels on each of them catch the light along the side as well as on the inner edge. The top surface of these indices has been brushed, and that makes a big and important difference when it comes to legibility. Fully polished markers can sometimes disappear in certain lighting conditions. Notably absent here is lume, unfortunately, which we'll come back to a bit later. At 3, a marker is foregone to make way for a date complication. Not just a date actually, but a perpetual calendar, so you can rely on the date being correct, regardless of whichever month or leap year you happen to be in. Like the hour markers, the frame has received polished bevels and, situated within, is a colour-matched black date wheel. Above the pinion is the Citizen logo, also applied, and that makes up the only text and branding on the front of the dial. Even the minute track has been pushed out to an angled chapter ring, rather than being printed on the dial. Minimal text and printing can look cheap or sparse if not done well, but here the negative space has been balanced really well, and it looks much more luxurious for it. It gives off an effortless look where the watch doesn't have to try too hard. It's a technique Grand Seiko use with their quartz models too, but honestly, I think it works even better here. If we're making Grand Seiko comparisons, there is one other elephant on the dial I haven't mentioned yet. That is of course the power reserve meter located just inside the 12 o'clock marker. It's a look very reminiscent of spring drive models, and a more cynical person might think Citizen included this intentionally just to mimic that look. Either way, just like on Grand Seiko, this is going to be a pretty polarizing design feature. The fan shape has been carved out and slightly recessed beneath the top surface of the dial with a gauge applied inside. A fairly simple needle hand is used to indicate the current power reserve levels. Hey, it's me from the future. That is to say, after I recorded the macro footage for this video. And, as you may have seen a little bit already, there's something going on with the hands. The hour and minutes hands have dust or marks or something on them. The seconds hand does as well, but on that one it's much more consistent and almost looks like an intentional texture. It's a bit confusing because if it's dust, why isn't there any on the rest of the dial or markers? It's not something you can see with the naked eye though, but I'm mostly just wondering how it happened. Did someone crack it open and poke around inside? If you have any idea on what it is, leave a comment. Knowing this now doesn't really change how I feel about the watch too much. I already knew it was a used watch, and the case and bracelet certainly had scratches already, which I was fine with. Anyway, I just wanted to make a note of it here and point it out. Back to the video. Speaking of hands, let's move over to the main hands on the watch. These are pretty straightforward but well executed. We've got a set of Dauphine hands with a needle second hand. There's a bevel running down the middle on both the hour and minute hands, which are polished on both sides. Here I wish they had replicated Seiko's trick of polishing one side and frosting the other. As it is, the hands can sometimes be hard to read in certain darker lighting conditions, and tend to disappear a little. That's also of course because the hands, like the indices, aren't loomed, so after dark legibility in general is not great. This is probably one of the main things holding the watch back as a perfect everyday piece. That seconds hand is of course ticking once per second since this is a solar quartz watch. It does however hit every marker perfectly with no visible bounce back, and each tick feels solid and confident. Covering all of that is a crystal that is a step above your average crystal. It is of course sapphire, which you'd hope for. It's also dead flat and has some insane amounts of anti-reflective coating applied to it. It is a blue coating, which is the only thing I'd change here. A clear one would have been better. But I have never found a situation where I couldn't see the dial clearly because of reflections. Most of the time, it feels like there isn't even a crystal there at all. If we move a step back for a second, we can go over the dimensions of this watch. For me at least, this is another very big plus this watch has going for it. Across the watch the diameter measures in at exactly 40mm, but I'd say it wears a bit smaller than that thanks to a well-designed case. It's a quartz watch, so height was never going to be an issue at 9.9mm, and lug to lug is just 45.8mm. So, smaller wrist sizes don't need to shy away from this one. It does seem like Citizen took one too many leaves out of Grand Seiko's book though, and we have a slightly awkward 21mm lug width. You might have to specifically track down a strap if you want to swap out the bracelet. Dimensions are only one part of the story though. The shape of the case as well can have a big impact on how it wears. This one here is just about perfect for the everyday style it's aiming for. Up front is a slim polished bezel that catches the light. A thicker bezel here would have ruined the proportions of the watch if you ask me, so Citizen got it right. The top surface of the case has been vertically brushed, and on both sides of the case, we have a pretty broad, high polished bevel running the length of the case. Looking front on, the polishing on the bezel and those bevels strikes a nice balance with the brushing on tops of the lugs. Moving further around, and the sides of the case are curved and actually flare out a little. This plays a big part in the watch feeling smaller than that 40mm measurement, because it's that extra width here that pushes it from what probably would have been a 38mm case size to a 40. Because it's polished, it will generally reflect the colour of your arm when you look at the watch, which also visually reduces the size on wrist. Turning the watch around, and you can see a moderately sized crown. It is unsigned, which a lot of people will complain about. It's not something that has ever really bothered me, and isn't high on the list of things I care about, but for many it is. And for the price the brand is asking for watches in the Citizen range, it should be signed. Here we can also see a recessed pusher at the 2 o'clock, which I'm guessing is used to set the perpetual calendar. I don't know for sure because it came to me already set, and so I'll never have to adjust it. Another missed opportunity when it comes to the crown is that it doesn't screw down. Considering the fact that it's solar and a perpetual calendar, you pretty much never need to use the crown once you set the watch, so having it screw down would have been a nice little bit of reassurance when it comes to water resistance. If we turn the watch all the way over, we see a solid caseback which does screw down and advertises the 100 meters of water resistance that the watch has achieved. Here we can also see a very nicely detailed engraving of the eagle crest that Citizen used for this range, as well as some specs around the outside. Even if you'll basically never see the caseback, especially since it's not a display caseback on an automatic watch, it's nice to know some care and detail has gone into it. The last aspect of the watch I want to go over is the bracelet. This watch has a solid 5-piece link bracelet, with those 2 polished inner pieces running the length of the bracelet. The end links are solid, and although they are male end links and extend from the case a little bit, they don't really affect the overall wearing experience, because they point down quite dramatically. Interestingly, the outer edge of the links has also been brushed, where this would often be polished to match the case side. I don't mind it though, and all the brushing here tones down the watch a little. The bracelet tapers from 21 to 18mm by the time it gets to the clasp, and that taper is necessary to bring down the visual presence of the watch if you ask me. The clasp here is not your usual looking clasp either. It's been divided into 3 distinct brushed sections, with the middle section housing the twin pusher release to open the clasp. A small detail that can be easy to miss is that each link either side of the clasp has a small polished bevel that increases as it meets the clasp, and it continues this bevel across the clasp. Opening it up, we can see that it has a milled inner, but we can also see that the clasp itself doesn't offer any positions for micro adjustment. You're going to have to rely on the included half links to get this one to fit, and I've been wearing this one on the slightly looser side of things. Since I'm already talking about how I wear it, let's get it on wrist and see how it wears. On my 7-inch wrist, I think it looks just about perfect. I'd say it wears a little smaller than the 40mm case size would have you believing, and because it's quite thin, it hugs the wrist really nicely. As I turn my wrist, you can see those polished surfaces catch and play with the light, as well as that sunburst effect on the dial changing. Every now and then, we also get a pop of blue from the anti-reflective coating on the crystal. I really like the way it looks and feels on the bracelet, but if you did want to change it up, here it is on a brown leather strap, and I think it works really well. A simple, elegant design like this will look at home on a wide range of straps. On this rich brown colour, the watch feels even more under the radar, and I think it really suits the watch. If you're not a fan of brown, it was always going to be a safe bet that a black strap would look good on this watch too. Some might think that a black dial on a black strap is a bit boring, and while I'd probably pick the brown over this, I still really enjoy this combination. So, we've clearly got a very nice watch on our hands here. It's one that I knew I would like before I got it, because I tend to gravitate towards simple, understated, elegant designs, but I didn't honestly expect to like it as much as I do. Out of all the watches in my collection, if I was to pick one to have as my only everyday watch, I might pick this even over my Grand Seiko Lake Sewer, which is a bit crazy to think about. I like it, but that doesn't necessarily mean you like it, and it also doesn't necessarily mean that it's a viable Grand Seiko alternative. If you're after an automatic watch when spending this kind of money, then of course this won't be something you should consider. But for someone who is looking for a watch to grab and go that is very well made and well finished without being flashy or drawing attention to itself, brand recognition aside, I think this Citizen offers more value for the dollar than the Grand Seiko equivalent. That you can pick these up for less, in titanium, and with some pretty exquisite dials if you're so inclined, is just icing on the cake. Am I going to sell my Grand Seikos and replace them all with the Citizens? Well, no. But at the same time, when I was looking at this, I was also looking at a double-branded 40mm Grand Seiko quartz, like an SBG V021 or 023. And what I can tell you is that since getting this one, I'm not looking for one of those anymore. Thanks again to Bai for sponsoring this video and making it possible for me to buy the watch. Don't forget to check out the video description for the link to sign up and get 10% off your first order. What do you think about this watch? Do you disagree and think it's still not on Grand Seiko's level? Is there another brand offering high-end quartz movements like these? Would you have one in your collection? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.